Lords, rising to speak at this point in the debate, I feel like I need to respond directly to the noble Lord, Lord Moylan, who asked about what zero or minuscule amounts of fossil fuel in the global energy system or Britain's energy system by 2050 would look like. I'm not going to address this in great detail, but I will point the noble Lord to a study published in 2019 by LUT University in Finland and the Energy Watch Group in Germany, which in great detail mapped out what 100% global renewable, so no fossil fuel and no nuclear, energy system would look like. And that was, this work economically competitive with the current fossil fuel and nuclear system. Now, before the noble Lord leaps up, he did make much of the issue of intermittency of renewable sources. And I'd point out that this study does see that 23% of electricity demand and 26% of heat demand is provided from stored sources to meet the need when necessary. And also addressing the points made by the noble Lord Moylan, he suggested that net zero was a constraint on energy policy. Well, the practical reality is, and we're reminded of this fact today, as many noble lords have noted, we are now at globally 1.1 or 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels of warming. And this is what 1.1 or 1.2 degrees look like. 1.5 is much worse, and beyond 1.5, as the world collectively agreed in Paris at the climate talks, is unthinkable. So this, to sum it up, is not politics, it's physics. It's the limit we have to meet, and that means not burning fossil fuels. Now, coming to my main remarks, I should declare my position on the advisory panel of Pleas for Planet and my positions as Vice President of the Local Government Association and the National Association of Local Councils. Now, my noble friend Baroness Jones of Moulsecoomb, I'm delighted to see, is foreshadowing the future, occupying what might be a front-bench wrap-up position in this debate, and my noble friend will be providing an overview of this bill. A Green in that position is something your Lordship's House is clearly going to need more and more as the issues of the climate emergency and social justice, so central to Green political philosophy, become more and more pressing. She'll be covering the utterly inadequate and illegal state of government policies. That's not the words of my noble friend and myself, but the High Court in its judgment yesterday, and the solutions already on tap, including the Climate and Ecological Bill introduced by the noble Lord Riesdale that had its second reading on Friday. I'm going to focus on some very specific elements of the bill and the ways in which, as Greens, we'll be working with others to improve it. And on improvements, I'm going to begin by identifying some of the missing elements, which I'm delighted to say have all been highlighted to varying degrees by other noble lords. First, we need enabling legislation to establish local energy supplies aimed at reigniting the growth of community-run renewable energy schemes that were really just taking off when the rug was pulled out from underneath them. And I note the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Carlisle, among others, has highlighted the importance of this. Now, we saw in the last session of Parliament 308 MPs, including 120 Conservatives and 119 Labor, supporting a local electricity bill, which would have created a local energy supply mechanism, enabling smaller-scale renewable generation schemes to sell their power directly to local people. This would make many more such schemes viable than they are now. And I spoke about the rug being pulled out. Well, we've seen hardly any growth in community energy schemes in the last 6 years. Those are 6 lost years, not just in terms of cutting emissions, but also 6 lost years of local prosperity that could have been generated, particularly in those communities the subject of the government's levelling up agenda. This is money being taken from the pockets of people who can ill afford it. And of course, what we've also seen is so many small independent businesses and cooperatives. If you were a solar installer or a small hydro scheme designer, then you're certainly not going to accept that the Conservative Party is any sort of supporter of your sort of business. Now, my understanding is that the government has said they'll accept the aims of that bill, and there have been preliminary meetings with the Energy Minister and BEIS officials. So a direct question to the Noble Lord the Minister: why is this not already on the face of the bill? This is something that is oven ready, to use a popular phrase. Second, a point others have also picked up, including the Noble Lord, Lord Ravensdale, the crucial role of local authorities and local communities in delivering net zero. Now, the Climate Emergency UK website checked this morning shows that 409 councils have declared a climate emergency. Action is being taken locally, is acknowledged as of great importance, and there's huge potential for municipal energy and, crucially, energy-saving schemes. It's crucial for policy in the energy area, as in so many others, to get away from the deadening centralism of Westminster and unleash the energy, enthusiasm and knowledge of democracy in local communities. As the Noble Lord, Lord Ravensdale set out, what money has gone out to local communities has still been doled out on the decisions of central government, hanging on to the purse strings and just handing over those who will jump through the hoops that Westminster wants them to jump through. And I would note also here that this is something that is acknowledged on the global scale. I watched over several COPs while Green Councillor Andrew Cooper actually drove through into the international COP agreement an acknowledgement of locally determined contributions. Now, I'm sure everyone in this debate has heard of nationally determined contributions as the part of COP, but there is actually recognised locally determined contributions, and that's something we as a nation must be making much more of. Thirdly, and in terms of the missing areas, again, a number of other Noble Lords have already pointed to this. We have to end the barriers to new onshore wind. 80% of people in the UK now support onshore wind, and only 4% oppose it. That's based on the government's own research. There's no relaxing of the planning rules around onshore wind in the recently published Energy Security Strategy. The document did say we will, quote, consult this year on developing local partnerships. So I wonder if the Noble Lord the Minister in his response could tell me how that's going, but also tell me why there's nothing on the face of the bill for that onshore wind. Now, I think it's very clear, looking at those three elements that I've identified as missing, that they are all interrelated. What we have in this bill now is the government privileging the large corporates, the gigantic multinational corporations, the lobbying-driven interests of the financial sector over the empowering of communities, of small businesses and cooperatives, and the interests of the planet. And I would say that it really is a role of your Lordship's House to turn that around. Now, very briefly, I'm going to skip through some of the areas of the bill, what's there and could be improved. And I here would very much agree with the comments of the Noble Lady Baroness Blake of Leeds in terms of the very strange balance of this bill towards carbon capture and storage and hydrogen, even if you just look at the sheer volume of clauses, the number of words. Now, the planet doesn't give us a get-out-of-jail-free card from the climate emergency, but all too often it seems that carbon capture and storage is treated as though it's that card. The sums for continuing to treat this planet as a mine and a dumping ground are made to add up with this magic, expandable, unproven and uncertain at scale addition, rather than acknowledging the needs to live within the physical limits of this planet. The maths gets particularly magical when it comes to biomass carbon capture and storage, where the trees that might, if they survive, store carbon for in 100 years' time are treated as though they're delivered and locked down today. Part 2 of the bill needs close attention from your Lordship's House. Now also, Part 3, hydrogen. Now, hydrogen no doubt has a place in our renewable energy future as a method of storage at times of high generation and for use in hard to decarbonise sectors such as ocean and land freight and steel production. But the government has failed to clearly identify these as the place of hydrogen, and it seems this bill is pointed towards its use particularly in home heating, where it's grossly inefficient and definitely not the direction we should be travelling. Electrification is a more effective, far more energy efficient method of displacing gas for most purposes. Now, moving on to another major part, Part 8, energy smart appliances and load control. We need to get away from thinking about the energy system as a tap that can be just carelessly turned on and off at will. Indeed, we also need to think a great deal more about water conservation, addressing the ideas behind that metaphor. Energy use needs to be thoughtful. Is the energy we're using right now a good use of this scarce resource that, no matter how it's generated, will cause environmental damage? As many noble lords have already said, the best energy is the energy you don't need to use. And I think I will be interested to see how many times from the noble lord the minister we hear the word world leading coming out. But where is the really simple measures in this bill? So many people and so many other times I've said about home energy efficiency and the energy efficiency of buildings. I'm not going to run through that at length. In fact, all we need to do is point to, referring to Part 9, the energy performance of new premises, Lord Christ's Healthy Homes debate that was conducted last Friday, and really you could take that wholesale and put into this bill. But why do we have office buildings with lights blazing all night with nobody in them? Why do we have so much really invasive, unpleasant video advertising screens blaring at us from every public space? Those are the kind of things that other countries have acted to control, to reduce energy demand for things we don't need, and we need to see that happening. Now, finally, skipping through even faster, Part 3, Chapter 3, fusion energy. Oh dear. As long as I've been a grown adult, it's only been 20 years away, and I've been grown adult for quite a long while. And it's a contrast, a real noticeable contrast, that this is in the bill and the onshore wind is not. Clause 162, electricity storage. This is extraordinarily brief and sketchy. And referring to my comments about the references to the noble Lord, Lord Moylan, this is a crucial area that surely needs more work. And I'd invite both other noble lords and people watching this debate, interested NGOs and campaign groups, to contact me about what we need to do more on that area. And finally, I'm not going to major on this today because the debates will also be held elsewhere, but Part 12, addressing the civil nuclear sector, and the whole idea of undersea nuclear waste storage. And I would ask the noble Lord the Minister how this squares with the 1972 Treaty on the Convention on the Prevention of Marine Pollution by Dumping Wastes and Other Matter, known neatly enough as the London Convention. This acknowledges the limited capacity of the oceans to assimilate wastes and render them harmless, and its limited ability to regenerate natural resources. Now, originally this only covered high-level radioactive waste, but it was amended in 1992 to ban low-level radioactive waste dumping as well. That's known as the 1996 London Protocol. So I would ask the noble Lord the Minister, I note the statement on the front of the bill signed by the noble Lord the Minister about environmental law, how this proposal in the bill squares with that convention.